Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Hire and Retain at Scale, Interviewing and Onboarding. My name is Sydney Cohen. I am a content coordinator here at Glassdoor. Thanks for joining us, and we're going to get started. Before we get into some amazing content, I'd like to share some good housekeeping tips for all attendees on the line. The audio is streaming over the web. There is no dial-in for the phone, so make sure your speakers are turned on and turned up. Please know that all the lines are muted to avoid background noise. But if you have any questions, I encourage you to please submit them in the question pane on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We'll be answering all questions at the end of the webinar. Also know that we are live tweeting this webinar from our Twitter handle at GD4Employers. That's GDFOR Employers. And we'll be using the hashtag GDChat if you'd like to join us there. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our featured speakers, Jennifer Johnston, Head of Global Employer Branding and Recruitment Marketing at Salesforce.
Hey, Sydney. Thanks for having us on today. We're excited to be here.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Drew Gallaugher, Marketing Program Manager for Global Employer Brand at Salesforce.
Thank you so much. Excited to share some best practices with everyone.
And our very own Molly McKinstry, Director of Enterprise Growth at Glassdoor.
Hey there, yes, thank you, Sydney, and of course, thank you to Jennifer and Drew from Salesforce. We are really excited for the conversation today, and hope to share some really exciting content and tips for all of you to take back to your organizations as it relates to an effective hiring process. So I think from here we can just kick it off, and I'll take us through the agenda for the next hour or so that we'll be spending together. There's a lot that we're going to cover, hopefully, and most importantly, it feels really meaningful and useful to all of you. Thank you again for joining. So kind of the pillars of the conversation today will be starting with the importance of an effective hiring process. We will certainly talk about aspects of that and what we have seen here, both at Glassdoor, in working with employers, and even our own experience of what makes a hiring process so important. We'll talk about tips on implementing a best-in-class interviewing process. Certainly easier than it sounds, but no doubt a critical part of the overall process here. And then creating an onboarding experience that will help retain talent. This is where, we're going to hear from Jennifer and Drew and their very specific examples as to what Salesforce is doing as it relates to all of this. And as Sydney mentioned, we will save some time for Q&A at the end, so please do use that Q&A filter box that you see in the webinar. And I think from here we will kick it off and really just start from the top, which is the importance of having an effective hiring process. I think the reason that all of us are here today kind of is with this concept at the backbone. So let's jump right in. Hiring the right people requires a thoughtful, structured approach to interviews. And of course, while carrying out a proper interviewing and onboarding strategy is challenging, it could possibly be one of the most important things any of us do being part of scaling businesses, and we need to do it right. So this stat just kind of blows me away to put a tangible dollar figure or a percentage to what the cost of a bad hire is. It can cost your organization nearly 30% of an annual salary. An average cost per hire and time to fill a given position are about $4,000 and 42 days, respectively. So, there really is just not any room for mistakes during this interview process. And again, it doesn't make it easy to accomplish, but it is certainly a critical thing that I think all of us, anybody who's hired, anybody who is, supporting hiring managers, this is kind of the reality of what we're dealing with. Your employer brand also depends on a good hiring process. Happy employees write better reviews about companies on Glassdoor and certainly in other kind of social media avenues, and likewise candidate interview reviews on Glassdoor specifically are certainly going to have an impact on the perception of companies and your fellow job seekers. So to me, this stat is kind of a powerful one to kick off the conversation with, and just realizing that the importance of finding the right people and making the right decisions as it relates to hiring, it's critical. So how do we do that, right? I mean, it's certainly one thing to talk about it, and it's another to put it into practice. And it starts with implementing a world-class, best-in-class interviewing process. And hopefully here we're going to share with you some tips that you can really take back to your organizations and business for implementation. So we're outlining really 7 tips for a best-in-class interviewing process. When it comes to creating that process, we're going to cover a number of different topics, but one, pre-interview planning and strategy, some do's and don'ts of interviewing, how to interview for culture, cultural fit, cultural addition, what to do when a candidate mentions Glassdoor reviews in an interview. Certainly that's a topic that I'm pretty comfortable with. How and why you should make your interview process more difficult, keeping the candidate informed, and, in summary, the benefits that you and your organization are going to reap by having a strategic interview process. So we're just really going to start right at the top, and let's talk about the interview planning and strategy. Because requirements differ between certain positions, various teams, having a structured plan before even posting a job really is going to be critical to ensure the highest quality candidate eventually receives and accepts an offer from you and the team. And, that's going to take a step-by-step process. So we're going to kick off with really talking about how to organize that process, right? I mean, there are a number of ways to do this. And you can go ahead to the next slide, Sydney. Thank you. One we want to see, or we recommend rather, is an evaluation flow map for every position, identifying interviewers up front, implementing standardized feedback mechanisms, and scheduling post-interview debriefs whenever it is possible. And certainly, your most critical roles, we would say, and I would say in just the work I've done with employers, that last step it can be somewhat of a non-negotiable. So if we kind of dig in here and talk about what that may look like. So first, steps in creating an evaluation process could include any of the following. An initial phone and or video screen, depending upon what your organization prefers, having a test or assignment as kind of a barrier of entry or just an initial understanding of whether a candidate is the right fit, first round of interviews, a second round, a team presentation, whatever this is going to look like for your group, the business line, that unit, the role, whatever it is, you've got to have that flow map built and created even before, again, we'd say posting the job, because all of this is going to come back to that candidate experience, and kind of the tighter the process feels and the more in sync that you all are as a business, the easier that's going to be for the candidate to understand. So if we now go to, how to communicate with the key stakeholders internally, and again, this is going to be so important because the communication that you and your team have, the job seeker and the candidate's going to feel. And I think all of us can probably reference an example or two of maybe where this went really well and potentially where maybe it didn't go very well. So communicating next steps to candidates as they get eliminated or progress through each stage is critical. And I think we're going to hear from the Salesforce team on examples of this and how they're doing it as a world-class organization. But it's so important that through the entire process, good or bad feedback, the candidate is receiving it. We know that this is a little bit of an uncomfortable and can be daunting situation for job seekers, and really communicating and being proactive in the approach here is going to pay dividends for you and your organization. Follow up with interviewers when there are large discrepancies in a candidate evaluation. And I can say that I've seen this personally at Glassdoor. I've talked to our employer customers who see this, and my perspective is a discrepancy in feedback isn't a bad thing, right? I mean, that's why you have various personalities and different kind of seniority in these interview loops. But it's really important to understand why maybe you're not aligned internally, and then what are you all going to do? What's important to you all as you vet those differences to make your ultimate decision. And really, 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 and I know this is so hard for hiring managers who are busy and being pulled in a ton of different directions, the importance of feedback deadlines is really critical. You know, again, going back to that candidate experience, what that journey looks like for them, having your interviewers be on time, having them being consistent and, you know, considerate of the time as it relates to the interview process is going to be really important. And I think that's a good, really next step into, okay, we've got the communication down, but what are the values, right, that your group and the business is going to stand for and represent? So it's incredibly important to remember that it all starts with establishing interviewing strategy that's going to align to the overall goals and missions and values of the company, right? I mean, this is really that first experience for your candidate to get a look into what is life like at your organization. What are you all about? That first impression is, you know, in many ways, one of the most important. So everything that you do throughout this process or your team does throughout this process is only going to be reinforcing and building upon that employer brand. A Gallup report actually just from several months ago says that 36% of job seekers say that brand or reputation of a company is the single most important consideration in a potential new job. So, you know, for anybody who's working on a brand team or helping with that kind of employer brand reputation, this just goes to really justify and I think legitimize the work you're doing, because 36% of job seekers say this will be the number one factor that they consider. So if they have a choice between two jobs, if your dream candidate has two offers, they're staring at them, everything about them is identical from comp to travel to what have you, the difference maker can and most certainly will be your brand and reputation. And that's something to really think about and to take seriously. Are you going to win that tiebreaker based on all the work that your team and your business is doing? And if you don't know definitively yes that you would, then it is time to really establish that in the very beginning of this process and in how you interview. So I mentioned this really to hit home with, again, that employer brand concept. You have sites like Glassdoor, and I know kind of the abundance of social media that makes all of us really accountable to what this process looks like, you know, making data-driven hiring decisions, hiring A players, making it a team effort. This is simple stuff, but it's certainly not easy, and having these values really reign through and true throughout the entire process is going to make a big difference. So let's move now to the do's and don'ts of interviewing. You know, while some of these may seem like a no-brainer, and trust me, I know that they do, it is so important to remember that the foundational guidelines for what to do, what not to do, how to do it, what could get you or your organization in trouble, it's really important stuff, and we'll kind of go through that now. So for the do's, you know, we would say, well, let's actually start with the don'ts. We'll start with the don'ts. We'll end with the do's. Sometimes the things that we shouldn't do are most important to focus on. You know, and the first one, which I think does happen a lot, is including someone brand new into the loop at the last minute. This can be really, really stressful for a candidate, right? I mean, we have hoped that they are prepared, they have done their research, they are coming in with their best foot forward, and this can be a really kind of disrupting thing for the candidate who, by all intents and purposes, may have done everything they needed to do to be prepared, but this could impact their ability to have a strong interview experience. You know, it's really beneficial to avoid this. So you get to see the candidate, their level of preparation, how they decided to come to that interview with the knowledge that you gave them. And throwing in somebody at the end, it really kind of throws it off kilter. And quite honestly, as I've seen, it doesn't allow you to have the real evaluation of that candidate that you may want because of a factor like this, which hopefully could be avoided. And it all comes back to that candidate experience. Whether or not you hire that person, you obviously want them to have a really, really positive experience. Everybody should leave feeling like they want the job, and avoiding the last-minute addition of a team member is only going to reinforce that. So when it comes to reviewing the resume or LinkedIn or any background information that you have on a candidate, we'd say it's important to not do this in person. It takes away from you being present, and that's again one of the most important factors of an interview, making that person feel really valued, making them feel like you appreciate the time that they've taken. So by looking down and reading rather than having that live conversation with them, it really is going to send a message that you aren't prepared. And even if you are, it's going to make the candidate feel, and unintentional or not, that your time was more important than theirs, which I don't think is something anybody's trying to convey. Lastly, we would say avoid asking any questions about race. Again, this is a no-brainer, but diversity and inclusion are huge, but you really have to be careful about how you're going to ask these questions. Heritage, background, political views, where they live, do they have children? I mean, all of these things may be a very natural part of, how you get to know somebody. It's really not an appropriate topic for the interview experience. It can create bias, again, unintentionally or not, and you really want to go through this process with as little bias as possible, and you really want to do everything you can to minimize that and have your hiring managers minimize that as well. So let's talk about the do's. Of course, use the resume as a guideline, but make sure this isn't the first time you've read it. Everybody I know is kind of running back-to-back meetings. Sometimes the calendar is stacked, but do everything in your power to make sure you've at least skimmed over that resume. You know the key accomplishments or milestones of this person. You know where you're going to kind of take the discussion, and then dig into their experience from there without reading the resume right in front of them. It's about being present. It's about that conversation. Make the candidate comfortable, offer water, offer them to use the restroom, give them an opportunity to take breaks, especially for these long kind of several-hour interviews. You really want them to feel like they were a guest, in your home, and then that's how they were treated. So the last thing, and I think this really kind of goes alongside the making the candidate comfortable, is pay attention to how much you're listening versus how much you're talking. You really want to create a ratio where you are listening more than you're talking, and you want to gain as much information as possible, not talking more than the candidate also is sometimes a good way to test the person's comfort level. And in the setting that you're trying to create, make sure that your candidate is having an opportunity to represent themselves more so than the opposite. I'm going to just keep us moving because I know we've got a lot of great content to continue to get through. So you want to interview for culture. Of course, this is such an important part of adding any new member to the team. So let's talk about areas to address. First would just be general culture fit. And Sydney, you can go to next slide, thanks. Here are just some examples of questions you may ask as you're trying to understand, whether or not this person is a general good culture fit. Asking them about their ideal work environment. What's a time where they can remember helping a coworker? What was the outcome? What's the most difficult problem you had to solve in a work environment, and how did you solve that? For each question, analyzing the response based on how well it complements with the way other employees at your organization would also respond and in their function specifically should be really telling in terms of just the general fit that you're looking for from a culture perspective. So now, beyond general, let's get into the company values specifically. And a couple of questions that you can use to do that would say, tell me about a time you were thrown into a new environment, how you handled that. Tell me about a time that you were asked to complete a project with limited resources. How did you feel about that experience? Obviously, these questions are going to be different dependent upon your company and your values, but it really is, you're trying to solicit that response to, okay, how is this person going to thrive and or potentially struggle in the environment that is very real for your organization? If agility is one of the values that is critical to the success, the long-term success of a team member, then, asking them about projects with limited resources or limited time, should really be able to tell you, is this the right person for the role? And also it should help them, the candidate, decide, is this the right environment for me? And I think that's a really important part of this entire process to continue to be mindful of. Next slide. Team culture. So, identifying key traits of the team. Every team has its own culture based on the natural function and the role that it takes to be successful. Talkative, assertive personality may be perfect for, a high energy team in your org, and maybe not though for a group that's going to have to be more analytical, more data driven, works more in silos or independently. So making sure you understand not only the general culture guidelines, the values of the company, but the very, very specific culture of the team this person ultimately is going to join, is a really important part of this process. So now let's move to handling Glassdoor mentions. Considering that 9 out of 10 Glassdoor users are job seekers, it's highly likely that you are going to encounter, or your hiring managers are going to encounter, candidates who have read your company reviews on Glassdoor. And I know that can feel like a scary thing. I know that can feel like it's taking a little control out of a scenario where you want control, but it also is the reality of the here and now. We live in a candidate-driven market. Job seekers are more informed than ever. They want to find out as much as they possibly can before applying and interviewing for a job. So next slide. Since 62% of Glassdoor users agree that their perception of a company is going to improve after seeing an employer respond to a review, it's really important to be engaged in that conversation. To make something as powerful as Glassdoor not feel like a resource or a useful tool through your interview process really is just not taking full advantage of what the platform is here for you to do. And really it is both the positive and the negative reviews. They can tell you a lot about your experience. So, if a candidate does mention Glassdoor reviews during an interview, it's really important to be prepared, alert the team, acknowledge those comments, be transparent in your response. And I'm actually going to let Drew from Salesforce chime in here because I know this is something that he and their team have a really great kind of method behind.
Thank you, Molly. Just to piggyback on that, it's something that we definitely are very aware of and cognizant of, both for employee reviews, but especially on the interview side most recently. So we are always kind of on alert, reading both the positive and negative reviews. We're making sure that we're sharing with the appropriate teams. It's anonymous, but most often we can kind of track down at least the right vicinity of where to send those things to our recruiting leadership. And then we want to acknowledge and respond. Coming forward, working with our PR or legal to make sure what we're going to put out is a consistent message that's good to be shared publicly, but it's something that our head of global recruiting takes the time and energy to go ahead and do just to make sure that we're out there. People are aware, both positive and negative. We're responding to comments that are really highlighting some of the best areas for us to improve, as well as areas where we're succeeding as we see it in the market.
Exactly, and thanks for that perspective, Drew. And I know you're going to give us a lot more insight. And I've got just a couple other pieces that I want to highlight before I'm going to pass it back to the Salesforce team. So from here, let's talk about the importance of making your process difficult. According to a Glassdoor economic research study, actually, we know that difficult job interviews are statistically linked to higher employee satisfaction. And so this seems maybe a little contrary. There's actually a benefit to making your interview process more difficult. So one, over a 10% more difficult job interview process is associated with 2.6 higher employer satisfaction later on. That's really what we just talked about. But there is a sweet spot. So the optimal or best interview difficulty level in every country is 4 out of 5. An interview experience that is difficult by not overwhelming so far for candidates, right? They want to feel challenged. They don't want to feel like the job was easy to attain because, then couldn't anybody get it, right? And you really want to make them feel like it is a thoughtful process. It is meant to be difficult, but when they get into the job, it's going to feel well earned. So 4 ways to make your process more difficult. 1 is creative interviewing. Determine defining factors for cultural and skills fit and use behavioral interviewing techniques to do that. Adding a test or a written assignment really is an important part of the process that is going to help in that, again, difficulty factor. It's going to take the candidate a little bit more time, a little bit more brain power, but it also helps from, an elimination perspective as well as getting that feeling of difficulty kind of where you want it. It is meant to be a barrier so that they know you're taking these submissions really seriously. The panel interview, preparing interviewers with job description in the resume, we've talked about that. That's kind of a no-brainer. But assign roles to each interviewer based on their specific job function. And make sure that the questions and the roles being played by your internal team really matches, again, what is the function of the job and what is the expectation of the person once they're in the role. And finally, a presentation. Having to evaluate a presentation for an entire team is no small task to a candidate. And again, it's going to take time and energy and resources for them to put that together. But we know that they're going to appreciate it even more so if ultimately they're hired. So in addition to all of this, obviously it is incredibly important to keep your candidate informed throughout the entire interview process. When they receive prompt and personalized rejection notifications, they're more likely to keep a positive impression of the company despite the rejection. And maybe that's a little bit of a taboo topic that isn't discussed enough, but really the way that we tell people no is just as important and potentially even more so than how we tell them yes and congrats on getting the job. So quick couple of guidelines to remember, set the expectations, make sure that the candidate knows general timelines, names and roles of interviewers, expectations about how the process is going to go, and then commit to and have your hiring managers commit to notifying the candidates, good or bad, whatever feedback it is at every single step of the process. They need to feel like they know what to expect, they're being given that feedback, and you're really holding true to the expectations that you already set. And lastly, close the loop, right? I mean, this may be one of the most important aspects of the candidate experience, but if you think back to when you were a job seeker, there's kind of nothing worse than just never hearing back. It goes a long way with candidates to close the loop. They want that feedback. They want to understand what they can improve on a go forward, and really reiterating the importance of this to your team is going to go a long way. So lastly, what are the benefits of a strategic hiring process? I think we've talked about a lot of things that you and your team can do to be prepared and how to scope out this process, but what are the benefits of that? So first and foremost, higher retention. 67% of employers believe that retention rates would be higher if candidates had a picture of what to expect about working at a company before taking the job. That feels kind of, again, like a no-brainer, but it is all about how we then put everything we just talked about into practice with that proactive communication, with the commitment to setting expectations. All of this is going to lead to higher retention. You're also going to have a higher quality of hire. Informed candidates are 2 times more likely to be hired because they are the right fit. So making sure that you are taking the time and the steps necessary in building out the strategic hiring process is only going to raise the bar for the type of folks that you are going to attract. And lastly, smoother onboarding. Creating a onboarding experience that's seamless for your new employees is kind of the beginning of their kind of journey with you as an employee, and making sure that this happens throughout is only going to reiterate all of the benefits we've just reviewed. So I know that's a lot of content, and I think everybody now is really eager to hear a company that is doing this, at kind of, again, best in class and beyond. And so I am going to turn it to Drew, who's going to talk to us specifically about interviewing at Salesforce and some of the best practices that they've implemented.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Molly. I appreciate the introduction, and happy to share some best practices and what we've got going on here at Salesforce today. So as you can see here on this slide, just a sense of some of the growth pair that we've really been on here. It's all really due, and fueling that is our employee base. We have over 25,000 employees, and if you'll click through, this is a build here, Sydney, you see the 25,000 employees, and last year alone, over 50,000 interview interactions in 2016, resulting in the 7,000 new hires externally that we made in that stretch. So to get a sense of what we're doing to make that operationalize at scale, we're really diving in and starting with a lot of data when it comes to our candidate experience to identify areas that we needed to work on. Next slide. So again, in saying that I'm starting with data, we wanted to compare. So about 18 months ago is when we really started honing in and focusing on what we were doing here at Salesforce. And what we found really wasn't so good when we looked at Glassdoor. We saw that 57% of candidates left us a positive interview rating, and we looked at our peer set to really give us a sense of, is that good, is that bad, what should we do from here? So what we found was we're really middle of the pack, and that wasn't great for us. We want to be very competitive for talent. We understand that it is a candidate-driven market, and we're going to need to do better so that we can compete for and close some of the best talent that's out there. So again, we saw that our lowest competitors were on the 42% on the bottom, up to 74% on the top. So we really needed to make some strides to start moving in the right direction. And if you click, taking a look at some of those reviews qualitatively, what we saw candidates really wanted from us. We saw that they were asking for better preparation. We saw that, echoing on what Molly was sharing as well, clear expectations up front. And we also saw some areas for improvement just from our own interviewing and recruiting etiquette, things that we flag and make sure that we want to know, what are best practices for us, how do we improve upon that. Next slide. So as a program manager focused on candidate experience, I really wanted to drive enablement across all the segments that touch this part of the process. So that starts with the candidate. We have created a mobile-friendly candidate resource guide that tells candidates all about us, gives them some interview tips, gives them the logistics of getting around our different offices globally, as well as provide some FAQs, answers around travel expenses, things that come up in the process and working with our recruiters, as well as our recruiting coordinators. So we wanted to make sure that they were enabled and that they were feeling really well prepared as they're stepping into those interviews. And next slide. Second is, a large group here that's touching candidates throughout the process are our hiring teams, both the hiring managers as well as the interviewers. So we created an internal training, kind of our secret sauce of how and why we do what we do when it comes to the recruiting process. So this is something that coaches our hiring managers and those interview teams around understanding the realities of a candidate-driven market, how to get competitive in recruiting for Salesforce, how to pitch Salesforce and our employee value proposition, as well as how to formulate their own hiring game plan and execute against that in the process. So this is something that we require of all people managers, as well as people that are promoted into new roles and hired externally as a part of our platform for training. So that's something that we cooked up and make sure that we're really implementing on a large scale. And if you'll click, in addition to that, it's something that we wanted to make sure that our interview teams were prepared as they're stepping into their interviews. So we added this new field to all the calendar invites called Key Things You Need to Know About Blank Candidate. We wanted to highlight 3 to 5 bullet points that if the manager or the interviewer hadn't printed the resume, hadn't really taken the time to prepare well in advance, that they had everything they needed to at least step in and be somewhat informed about, okay, what are my, what's my story here? What do I need to know about this person as I'm about to step in and interview them? So we've seen a good uptick coming from this as well, positive response from both the recruiters who are entering this information and the hiring managers and interviewers are really appreciating this kind of last-minute key things field as well. And if you'll go to the next slide. And the last piece of the enablement really comes around enabling our recruiters. And this is just, there's a lot to be done in this space. We want to make sure that we're setting clear expectations up front, providing them with better tools across the board, and that includes things like templates, best practices on closing the loop, dashboards when it comes to where people are at in our system and how to interact with them. You'll see here on the right is an example of one of the templates that we built that helps them set expectations up front. So this not only hits recruiter enablement, it also hits the candidate. This is a template that's going to them as they kick off moving from recruiter screen into our first stages of the interview process. Gives them a 3-bullet view of kind of what to expect and the land ahead, as well as providing them with some links to some good content for the team and group that they're interviewing with specifically to make sure that they're feeling well prepared stepping into those interviews. Beyond that, we've worked on our tools and feedback collection to make sure that when we have to close out with candidates that we're doing it in a better and cleaner fashion. So if you can go back real quick. Ultimately it's coming down to all the tools, templates, everything that we're doing in that space. We're only advancing. So that really rounded out the picture ultimately from enabling our hiring managers, enabling candidates, and enabling our recruiters. So wanted to ask at the end of that, and you guys got a sneak peek of how we are doing, but what have we done in those 18 months? And we saw an excellent spike, adding over 1,000 Glassdoor interview reviews in that period, and we're over 74% positive interview reviews today. So you can see that's just a great leap in enabling all these different groups, making sure that you're focused on what is being said qualitatively, and then being able to implement that and do things that are going to scale well for all of your organizations. So we've seen just an excellent response in the short time that we've been focused on this, and we're looking forward to continuing to hopefully lead the pack here in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Drew. So many great examples, and I hope that a lot of great takeaways that you all can bring back to your own business and organization. So the next thing we're going to talk through is creating an onboarding process that is really going to, one, reiterate all of the hard work to that effective interview process you've now just created, but also going to help retain talent. So far more than a new hire orientation, right, where new employees are briefed on benefits and photographed and badged, sent on their way, an onboarding program is a comprehensive way to get new hires fully immersed into your organization. I think if we really just review everything we talked about, how much time and energy and resources are going to be put into finding the right person, getting them on board, adding them to the team, the way we onboard them is critical. So let's talk about a couple milestones to note. When creating your onboarding process, it's important to kind of have these milestones as the pillars of what is going to happen and how to build and implement a process around each of these things for consistency, transparency, and really just comfort to your brand new employee who, is just taking a chance and joined your organization. So 1, when paperwork is signed. 2, the week before their start date. 3, their first day. And 4, what happens during that actual week. So let's quickly just talk about each of those 4 milestones, or again, really pillars of that onboarding process. So first and foremost, when the paperwork is signed, once this happens, this is again for the hiring managers. The hiring managers should reach out to let them know how excited that they are, that they're joining the team. Think about this from a personal perspective. All of us can probably remember at one point in our lives having accepted a job and signing that paperwork, and you're having a lot of feelings. And to hear from the hiring manager to share in that excitement is just going to be that personal touch that can really go a long way in making that individual feel welcomed. Go over things like transportation and timing of when they should arrive, anything that can give them that sense of preparation so you can help remove any uncertainty from, the experience from here is going to go a long way, and it's going to reiterate that warm welcome that no doubt you want them to feel. Now let's talk about the week prior to their start date. So at this point, we would say, and we would certainly hope that the hiring manager is going to be scheduling onboarding meetings with key team members. And again, depending upon the size of your organization, how expansive your enablement team is, this may be something that your hiring managers partner with enablement around. But either way, you want to make sure that the folks who are going to work closely with this new team member, even if it's just the broader team, there is time already set aside for what happens when that person comes. So setting an agenda for every meeting, making sure the team members are prepared with relevant information to make the most of those onboarding sessions is going to be really important. And even setting up a lunch meet and greet, something a little bit more informal and casual, but also kind of, again, expected and scheduled, is going to help team members get acquainted and really feel kind of assimilated to the team. Let's talk about their first day. So one, greet them excitedly. Again, kind of a no-brainer, but it's also easy to just get into the kind of the grind of the day-to-day. And, you may be walking out of a really stressful meeting, preparing for a huge call, whatever it is. Make sure when you greet your new hire, they see nothing but excitement from you. If they have an orientation, take them to it. Make sure that they have a designated person to pick them up. If it can't be you, introduce them to their workstation. Just help them get acquainted. I think any of us, no matter what phase of our lives that we are in, there is something, a little bit unsettling about being brand new to an environment with new people, unknown. And the more that you can make this person feel welcomed and supported, truly the better and the greater that experience is going to be for them. Assigning them a buddy it may sound like it wouldn't be necessary depending upon the role or the seniority of this person, but it is, going back to the concept of making them feel like they are a part of something bigger, a part of a greater team, and that they are going to be supported through and through. It's going to make a big difference. So the last thing here is we would recommend setting check-ins at 30, 60, 90 days. Again, dependent on the role, dependent upon the size of the team, this may feel like, you're going to talk to them far more than this. But giving them that expectation day one that you are going to have a monthly review with them for their first quarter, it just helps them feel like the engagement is high, the amount of care and attention being applied to them specifically is going to great lengths, and it's only going to help them feel that much more welcomed and set up for success. Lastly, beyond the first day, during the first week, we would say this. It's hectic, right? They're going to be drinking from a fire hose. There's going to be a lot coming at them, from content to personas to all of the things that make joining a new company exciting but also challenging. So give them the expectations and help settle them, right? So schedule that recurring one-on-one. Make sure you can set goals, go over protocols, team structures, things that they may not feel comfortable asking others but are really important for them to know. This is the time to let them have the comfort of a one-on-one to always look forward to, where they can bring those topics. Make sure that you are helping them be familiarized with leadership and other departments. If they're going to work cross-functionally with other groups internally, make sure you're helping create those introductions and establish that cadence so they have a really good network around them that's going to help them, again, be set up for success and reach their individual goals. Team structure, general protocols, all of these things during the first week are just going to continue with that feeling of, we're excited you're here, we want to support you through this process, and it's going to be a really fun journey from this point forward. So similar to Drew taking us through this, at Salesforce for interviewing, we are now going to have Jennifer talk about how Salesforce is thinking about onboarding and some of the things that they're doing. So I'm going to let her take it from here.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Well, this is a topic that I'm actually super passionate about, and I'm really thrilled to be here to share a few of the ways that we've been reimagining onboarding at Salesforce. I certainly want to start from a place of humility. This is something that was not always a strong point for us. You know, we had grown very quickly, and we were onboarding thousands of employees on processes built when we were onboarding maybe tens of employees. So this is actually a slide from an exec presentation that I gave on this topic 3 years ago, and you can see very clearly I had a message I wanted to send to them, and that was, Houston, we have a problem. Will you roll my stats across here for me, Sydney? Just all 3 of those. So when we started digging into this, we found some pretty interesting issues in the data. So one of the biggest issues was that the new hire provisioning app was only being filled out on time 64% of the time, which meant that about 36% of our new hires weren't getting their equipment, their access, or their workspace on day one. Our day one experience had a very lackluster 3.0 out of 5-star rating, and only 76% of our new hires were rating themselves as successfully onboarded at day 90. You know, that's a C grade. That's certainly not what someone expects when starting at one of the world's most innovative companies. And, you know, this disconnect was really starting to cost us employees. We were seeing that very, very clearly. And I love this. I like to show this email. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, but this little gem made the rounds of our executive team. And this is a very high-value employee that we had brought in that came in and had a horrible day one, so horrible that they actually quit on day one. And to me, this was the momentum. This built the fire behind. We really got everyone's attention and said, let's get after this. And we had a very clear mission, which was completely reimagine what we were doing in terms of onboarding. So what did we do? If you go to the next slide for me. At Salesforce, you might be starting to get the sense that we always start with data. So one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that as we reimagine onboarding, that we were really doing it from the perspective of the user. We wanted a user-centered approach. And in order to get to that, we had a couple of places where we could pull some data. So one of the places we did have a new hire success chatter group in our employee community. And this was kind of the lifeline for our new hires. This is where they could go to ask any question that they had, any problem they were having, see if they could get some help either from the program team or from the crowd. A lot of the crowd in here helping these new hires out. We also had our service app called Concierge, where they could go to ask questions and also file help cases. So these 2 sources of data gave us a tremendous amount of information about what our new hires needed and when. And we used that information to take 2 very key actions that made a huge difference. So next slide, please. One of them was to build a new provisioning app, and we actually call it the Wizard because this thing is magical. You know, what we learned was our managers weren't filling out the provisioning app because it had like 30 questions, and some of them were pretty hard, and so we saw a high rate of abandons on filling out the form. So we took a look at it and we said, actually, it doesn't need to be this hard. So now our form is down to just 4 key questions. What kind of computer do they want? Do they get a mobile phone or not? Where will the workstation be? And finally, what user on the team could we just clone to give them the same programs and access and peripherals? So that was a huge win. Then we built this new hire success email journey, and this is a really fun one, and most companies have some kind of marketing technology that they use with customers. You can also use it with your own employees. And so what we did for this was we started to say, what is all that information they need? When are they seeking it? And we put it into an email journey. It's literally an automated feed of information, and that information isn't coming in a flood on day one. It's coming in a drip over the course of their entire first year. So what was interesting is we had a lot of naysayers who said no one's going to want to open emails for an entire year, right? They're going to open them for 2 weeks and then they're going to stop opening them. Well, shocker, 90% of the time these emails are getting opened because they are predictive, they're proactive, they're relevant, and the resources are useful. And in addition to that stat feedback, I loved the qualitative feedback. People email back to this mailbox, and this one was really a fun one. Someone, a remote employee, sent a note and said, I don't know who is sending me these, but thank you, in all capital letters. I feel like I have a friend. And, you know, you just That's just a priceless sentiment from a new hire. What a great first impression. So if you flip to the next slide, in doing these things like the automated email journey, it allowed us to free up the day one experience to be a completely different experience. I mentioned that death by PowerPoint. We don't cram all the information you need to know down your throats on day one anymore. Instead, our new hires come to a very high experience, high touch event. There's a provisioning campground where they get their pieces, but they also get tech support and really get into their systems. They get some wonderful, just the top tips, the things they really want to know on day one versus everything they could possibly ever need to know. They have interactive games, and most importantly, we have these Aloha storytellers who just come in and talk about what it's like to work at Salesforce, what works in the culture, what doesn't, and take the burning questions our new hires have about working at Salesforce. So I want to point out that we do not only do this at our headquarters. We have locations all around the world. So what we did is we put this experience in a box, and we put it out to all of our hubs. And in order to scale this, no, we don't have a 50-person onboarding team. We actually engaged a network of Aloha ambassadors within each of our hub offices. People who have, like we like to say, they bleed blue, they love Salesforce, they're values champions. And we engage them to deliver this program at their various hubs. And we reward them with some fun things like a profile badge, swag, and recognition for donating their time to make sure our new hires have an amazing first impression. And we think that culture is so critical that beyond day one, if you flip to the next slide, we also have a full, 700 of these fine folks helping us deliver that program. We also have a full one-day culture immersion we call Becoming Salesforce. So this isn't your typical new hire orientation. This happens sometime within your first 6 months of working at Salesforce. You're invited to come to headquarters where you're going to hear exec fireside chats, exec keynotes. Everyone who's an SVP plus is expected to participate in the program and volunteer to give a keynote, to give a fireside chat. They also go out and volunteer in their community. It's just a fantastic way to really champion our value of giving back. That's so core to who we are. They have a really cool interactive campground that they can ask questions about all their employees' programs and services and get to know our Ohana groups. And we like to say no good day ends without a cocktail here at Salesforce, so the day ends with a happy hour. So we credit this with really helping us keep the wheels on the culture bus. We want our new hires to feel a huge sense of responsibility for keeping Salesforce special, keeping it to us as we grow. So I know you're wondering, how's this all working out for us? So I'd love to share some results with you. We set some goals at the outset of this program 3 years ago. We wanted to get that 64% percentage of new hire apps filled out on time up to 95. We are at 96% on that. We wanted to get our day one, first we said 4.0, and then we said, hell, let's make it 4.5. Why not shoot for the moon? And we are currently getting a 4.6 from our new hires on that. Again, on new hires self-reporting, they feel successfully onboarded. We are at 76%, if you remember, just a few slides ago. We are now at over 94%. And we really only had a goal of 90% because we figure, some people are going to struggle. So to be sitting at 94 on a self-reported number, we're just thrilled with the results. We know we, of course, have to keep working hard at this. As Drew said, we're hiring 7,000 people a year right now, so definitely going to keep improving, but really thrilled with the results we've been able to achieve today. So that's our story, Molly.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jennifer. My goodness, it sounds so exciting, and I think, for everyone joining today, hopefully you've got some ideas that you can take back to your business, regardless of the size of your organization or the number of hires you specifically are responsible for onboarding. I think we've heard a lot of great stuff from both Drew and Jennifer on how we can all be set up for some more success. So we wanted to make sure we left today with some key takeaways. There's a lot of content, and what can you just take back and implement right away? So I think first and foremost, setting expectations, closing the loop, and being prepared during that interview process, those are kind of, as I see it, non-negotiables, right? If you do nothing after this call but go back to your business and say, we really need to be better about setting expectations and closing loop with candidates, you will move the needle in the right direction for your business. I have no doubt. The other takeaway, onboarding goes beyond that first day. It truly does. I think it's so easy to feel like it's a box that we check that, okay, yes, new hire, first day succeeded, cool, move back to, reality. And the truth is this is an ongoing experience for any of your new team members, and we need to make them feel that way beyond just, those first 9 hours, 8 or 9 hours. And the last thing I would say is, Glassdoor is here to help you through this process. We talked briefly about the fact that you do have interview feedback that your candidates and job seekers are leaving on Glassdoor. And don't be fearful of that. This is really meant to help you. What can you be doing better? What can you take from that unsolicited feedback and apply it to help just continue to improve this process, be best in class, and make sure that your candidate experience through and through is a positive one. So hopefully those takeaways all feel meaningful for you all in your own right. And I know at this point we do have some questions that we want to be able to field in the 5 minutes we have left.
Thank all three of you for sharing such awesome insights. I know I've learned a lot during this session. Our first question, I think I'd like to have Jennifer field this one. In regards to culture fit and team culture questions, what type of questions do you utilize for phone screening to hunt for A players?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I want to just make a correction on that. We've really moved away from culture fit to culture add. So I want to be clear that we're looking for people that share our core DNA, our Ohana values, that are part of Salesforce, things like giving back, equality, well-being, and also, of course, customer success and innovation. But we're also looking for what are you going to bring to the party that's going to be an ad. So a few of the things that we often ask people, what's your favorite cause? What do you donate your time to? In terms of an ad, we might ask people, what's unique or special about you? Like, tell me something about yourself that you're really proud of. Tell me who you are. I want to know more than what's on the paper here. So we're really looking for people that not only share our values, but maybe are going to help us evolve our values as we grow and help us be more inclusive. So definitely happy to, if you want to email me at jj@salesforce.com, I'm happy to share more detail on questions.
Thanks. And Molly, I'd like for you to take this next one. How and when do you encourage candidates to submit Glassdoor reviews in an appropriate manner?
It's a really good question, and I think that I can provide a couple of answers there because it does depend on your organization specifically and what you all kind of have indoctrinated as a feedback loop. So what we have seen work really well is once a candidate has gone through an interview experience, gone through a loop, and has been dispositioned either way, either with an offer or having been told that they weren't selected, we ask at that time to please let us know, what about the experience went well for them? What about the experience can we continue to improve upon, and where can we get better? Because we want them to know that that is always our goal, to improve and get better and move the needle. Also, where we see a lot of employers asking for feedback is through that onboarding process. I think, again, to just reiterate the message that we've talked about today, that onboarding is not the day one and stops there. It certainly goes beyond that. So we say, at your 30-day kind of check-in, hop on Glassdoor and tell us how it's been, what's been going well, where have you felt great support, where is there room for improvement, and these are all things that, the team reads. And I know we heard, from Drew as how Salesforce approaches it. Glassdoor, we, utilize our own platform to get this insight about our business and what we're doing. So I think it's going to depend what makes sense for you, but at the least we would say, that kind of final call with the recruiter, whether it's offer made or letting them know they haven't been selected and why, and at that 30-day checkpoint for onboarding.
Awesome. And Drew or Jennifer, this one is specifically for either of you. How does Salesforce assess employee satisfaction in the onboarding process?
Yeah, that's a great one. I mentioned the metric of new hires reporting themselves as being successfully onboarded. So that's one very important metric. Does the employee themselves fill that? So we actually do surveys like everyone else. 90-day survey is probably the most important one that we do, where we ask that particular question. So it's a lot of self-assessment, just letting us know how we're doing. We also have we do feedback after the day one event. We do feedback at the Becoming a Salesforce event. So there's multiple points for them to give us their feedback. And we do check in with them around that 1-year mark as well. So lots of, again, we're very data-driven. We try to get as much information as we can throughout the process.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to wrap up here for today. For everyone asking, you will receive a copy of the slide deck as well as the full recording in your inbox within the next 24 to 48 hours, so you can look out for an email from us. Thank you, Molly, Jennifer, Andrew, for joining us today. And I hope you all have a great afternoon and look forward to seeing you all in our next webinar. Have a great morning or afternoon.